Okay, first in a new series of screencast video lectures for the unit on postcolonialism. So what I want to do is read two documents that I've posted onto Blackboard under readings and miscellany. They're titled Postcolonialism 1 and Postcolonialism 2. And I would like for you to read both of those documents in succession, Postcolonialism 1, then 2. Afterwards, I would like for you to watch this screencast video lecture and the next one. I'm just going to read through both of those documents. I might pause and elaborate and embroider maybe on some concepts and ideas, but I do think it helps for y'all to first read through these documents on your own and do your level best to comprehend the concepts that way. And also for you to watch the screencast video lectures in which I read through the notes and the narrative summaries of some of the important concepts for postcolonialism. And with the help of the intonation of voice, and also as I believe I mentioned in previous screencast video lectures, somebody who is deeply familiar with the materials, to hear that person read through the definitions of the concepts and ideas that are most fundamental to postcolonialism, otherwise referred to as postcolonial literary criticism or postcolonial theory, will help you to be able to acquire an in-depth understanding of these concepts moving forward. It's going to take a little bit of work and patience, though. Okay, so some notes and comments from postcolonialism, which is an enormous and an interdisciplinary field, if you will, in the humanities and the social sciences. So postcolonial theory is not something that folks in English departments work with. In philosophy departments, social sciences, liberal studies, women and gender studies, history, you name it. Anybody who's working in the humanities and the social sciences needs to know some of the fundamental concepts from postcolonialism or postcolonial theory, right? So it's defined in a variety of ways. And as I mentioned, it's an enormous and interdisciplinary field. First and foremost, it refers to diverse social, cultural, and political movements over the last several hundred years that can be described as anti-colonial. If one attends to the failures and successes of anti-colonial resistance to colonial and or imperial domination, then one can theoretically learn from the former and build on the latter. Ultimately, postcolonial theory is, like Marxism, a critical theory, which is to say a theory of liberation. Any concerted resistance to European political, economic, social, and cultural dominance can be best described as anti-colonial. Resistance can take a variety of forms. Armed resistance, to say violence, or violent resistance, subversive works of writing and art, labor strikes, subversion of the law, etc., etc. In fact, the list goes so long, the etc., etc. does not even begin to do justice to the ways in which folks have gathered together in collective solidarity to resist and to undermine and to fight against the norms and the values and the social and cultural practices of European colonialism and imperialism, not to mention its legacies, which is to say its aftermath. Most post-colonialists or post-colonial historians, indeed many historians, not just post-colonial historians, date the advent of European colonialism to 1492, as you may remember from middle school or even elementary school, the year that Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. When he discovered, as the history books oftentimes say, the new world, right? And specifically, refers to the moment whereby Christopher Columbus, who's trying to find a trade route to India, just happened by accident upon the island of Hispaniola, which in contemporary terms we refer to as the nations of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, both, by the way, former colonies of powerful European nations, which is, say, Spain for the Dominican Republic, and also France with respect to Haiti. It's important to emphasize that postcolonialism is not simply a field of academic study. A postcolonialist is someone who is committed to the development or the creation of identities and communities that can effectively resist colonialism and or imperialism and create their own futures or make their own histories in the Marxist sense, if you recall from the unit on Marxism, whereby Marx talks about how men and women, if they join in solidarity and they achieve this thing called class consciousness, that they have the agency as a group, most importantly as a group, right? Not possible otherwise, to transform history and transform their lives or the conditions of human life for the better. Okay, so Marxist theory is very, very important for post-colonial theory. Okay, and also to the project of becoming post-colonial. So post-colonialists are writers, they're politicians, artists, soldiers, lawyers, members of labor unions, theorists, scholars, etc. All in all, any person or group committed to the liberation of people subject to colonial or imperial rule. Now, post-colonialism's academic incarnation dates back to the 1980s, and it became prominent in the American Academy in the early 90s. As you read in a chapter from Robert J.C. Young's Postcolonialism and Historical Introduction, he says that postcolonial studies in the academy, as it's practiced at universities and colleges across the world, consists of research focused on the history of colonialism and imperialism, with very special attention to the way their legacies, right, social, political, economic, and cultural, impact the contemporary moment. So, just to give you an example, the history of colonialism and imperialism, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it dates back to 1492, when Columbus happened upon, by accident, the island of Hispaniola, right? So the history of European colonialism and imperialism is rather long. It's several centuries long. And though colonialism and imperialism ceased to exist in a manner of speaking post-World War II, when the great sort of system of world empires, collapsed and weren't able to put themselves back together again. Though colonialism and imperialism is, in a manner of speaking, dead, it still has lasting consequences in the sphere of society, in the sphere of politics, economics, culture, what have you. Okay? And it's worth bearing in mind, knowing, remembering, reminding yourselves that 90% of the terrestrial globe have been colonized or controlled by the most dominant imperial powers, which is, say, Britain, Germany, Belgium, France, and Spain, by the time of World War I. Which, when you think about it, why did World War I happen? Well, it happened for a variety of very, very complex reasons. But a big, substantial part of the reason as to why it is that World War I happened was a consequence of the rivalries between nations in their bid for power, for land, for colonies, and access to cheap labor across the world, right? Cheap labor that was created by the conditions of colonialism and imperialism, okay? And now Britain was the most dominant empire, governing 1/5 of the globe, as you see in Robert J.C. Young's chapter that you all read, and 1/4 of the population during the age of high imperialism, the latter part of the 19th century, when Queen Victoria's long reign, came to an end. The British held colonies in Africa, Asia, Australia, and Latin America, including the Caribbean. And you think about why it is that English has become the international language of business in the 20th century and in the 21st century. A lot of that is explained by the fact that the British Empire was able to expand its influence, right, so far across the globe through the course of the 19th century predominantly, and then parts of the 20th century. So decolonization, which happened in waves towards the end of World War II, refers to the historical process whereby a colonizing nation is either forced out of a colonized region through armed rebellion or various other means, or armed rebellion in conjunction with various other means of resistance, right? Or cedes or gives up control of the region's resources and infrastructure to the descendants of its original inhabitants. Okay. Now we're reading a novel right now by J.M. Coetzee called Age of Iron, a novel that deals with the various legacies or the aftermath of European colonialism and imperialism. And that colonial / imperial system, that system of dominance and control over a significant portion of a population, is coming apart in the late 80s or so. Okay? And so democracy didn't happen until Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for a number of years by the South African state, was the first democratically elected president of South Africa. And that didn't happen until fairly recently. Okay, so that'd be an example of decolonization, right? It's the end of a long, difficult, complex, and violent process. So there were several ways of decolonization that occurred just before, during, and after World War II. And as Young mentions in his book, one of the chapters that you read on colonialism or imperialism, decolonization occurred rather rapidly throughout the globe after World War II. Now, though the U.S. was formerly a colony of Britain, after independence was achieved, it quickly colonized huge territories in North America. So Young remarks that the U.S. was and still is considered to be an imperialist nation by most post-colonial theorists. And I, by the way, am in agreement with Young on this matter, that the United States still is an empire, okay? Although there are certain signs that the empire is in decline. Whether that's rapid decline or not is another question. So in lieu of the term third world, post-colonialists tend to favor the term tricontinental, which refers to the three continents of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where a lot of European colonies were formerly formed over the history of the past 100 to several hundred years or so. And the term tricontinental refers to the Great Havana Tricontinental of 1966. This is after World War II, in which these representatives from these parts of the world, various nations, forged the first alliance of the peoples of the three continents in opposition to colonialism and imperialism, or Western economic, political, and cultural dominance in their respective parts of the world. Though much of the world had been decolonized at this point, that is, formerly colonized people had won political independence from imperial nations, many leaders were concerned that the newly independent nations were still subject to European economic and cultural power. And the tricontinental critique thus refers to a political and intellectual culture, or a culture of ideas that combines the passions, energies, and creativity of formerly colonized peoples to develop tactics and strategies of resistance to European global hegemony or dominance or rule. And this idea of the civilizing mission is a very, very important one. And it's a part of colonialist discourse, or what Tyson refers to also as colonialist ideology, or what others refer to as the ideology or ideologies of imperialism. This is a foundational idea that supports the idea and the practice of imperialism. So the idea of the civilizing mission, that Western expansion is an unequivocal good for both the colonizing nation and colonizing peoples, has been demystified or deconstructed as a pretext or an excuse or a rationale for conquest. In other words, the one might claim that the introduction of capitalist forms of economy, Western science and medicine, technology, religion, and values to so-called less advanced peoples will, in the long run, prove beneficial. History has proven this idea to be specious at best, really. That is, an idea that veils or obscures the way or the ways in which colonization is motivated primarily by the economic interests of the colonizing nation. Okay? Post-colonial theory is a critical theory, a theory of liberation. Like all critical theories, it aims to understand how power is produced, maintained, and reproduced within certain communities or classes, to be more precise, at the expense of others. This makes postcolonial theory, as you might have guessed, similar to Marxism in its aims, values, and methodological principles. Indeed, postcolonial theory studies political economy to analyze how the economic wealth or power is unevenly distributed within and amongst societies or nations. Now, it is important to stress that though power is historically unevenly distributed between imperial nations and colonized peoples, post-colonial theory acknowledges that power is also unevenly distributed within imperial nations. Just look at the class structure and the class dynamics of British or English society during the Industrial Revolution, which really makes possible the expansion of British capitalism through colonialism, imperialism possible, right? So one can say that the working class in Britain or England helped to support the projects of colonialism and imperialism in rather decisive and critical ways. So that said, it is important to keep in mind that imperial ideology, forms of economy, and political systems benefit an extremely limited class of individuals within the nation. That is, those who own the means of production, the means of communication or representation, the means to disseminate ideology, right? Those who own the superstructure and have a vested interest in the maintenance of the uneven power relations that divide people along the lines of class, as you'll recall from the unit on Marxism. Okay, so I'm going to stop this video right now, and in the next video lecture, I'm going to talk about Robert J.C. Young's crucial conceptual distinction between colonialism and imperialism, and attempt to explain, what the most obvious and most important differences are between colonialism and imperialism as concepts, as ideas, or as analytical categories that help us to understand the history of European colonialism and imperialism, and also biological implication or extension, the modern world, which is a product of that long history.